When my nephew was born disabled, I didn't scream or cry. I did something far worse. I erased him from my life. No visits, no birthdays, no love. I told myself it was easier that way, until one day, he looked straight at me and changed everything I believed about myself. The day my nephew was born, I knew something was wrong before anyone said a word. Hospitals have a rhythm to them, machines beeping, nurses moving quickly, families whispering in anxious circles. But that day, the rhythm broke. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Smiles froze halfway. Even the air felt heavier, like it was waiting for permission to move again. I was standing near the vending machine when the doctor came out. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He adjusted his glasses, looked at my parents, then at me, and said quietly, "There are some complications." That word complications hung there, soft but deadly inside the room. My sister lay exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, her hands trembling as she asked over and over, "Where's my baby?" No one answered her right away. That should have been my first warning. When they finally brought my nephew in, wrapped tightly in a blue blanket, everyone leaned forward instinctively. Everyone except me. The doctor explained gently, carefully choosing every word like it might explode if handled wrong. Developmental disabilities, physical challenges, long-term care, therapy, uncertainty. I watched my sister's face as she listened. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She simply reached out and held her son closer, like the world had already tried to take him from her and failed. "He's perfect," she said. Everyone nodded. I nodded too. But inside, something twisted. I wish I could say I felt immediate love. I wish I could say I felt protective, or brave, or selfless. I didn't. I felt fear. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind that convinces you to step back instead of forward. The kind that whispers, "This is going to be hard. This will change everything." And I didn't want everything to change. At first, my absence was subtle. I skipped the first visit after they came home. "Let them settle in," I said. "I missed the next one too. I've got work." When weeks passed, I sent a message instead of showing up. "How's the baby?" She always replied kindly, always with updates, always with pictures. I stopped opening them right away. I told myself I was giving them space. I told myself I wasn't good with babies. I told myself my presence wouldn't help. But the truth was uglier. Every time I thought about holding him, I imagined doing something wrong, hurting him, watching him struggle, seeing my sister's exhausted face up close and knowing I couldn't fix any of it. So I chose distance. Family gatherings became uncomfortable. My nephew needed special care, special equipment, special attention. Conversations slowed. Plans changed. Everything revolved around him now. And instead of adapting, I withdrew. I arrived late, left early. Sometimes I didn't show up at all. No one confronted me. No one accused me. That somehow made it worse. Years passed. My nephew grew. Slowly, differently. He didn't hit milestones the way other kids did. He didn't run into rooms shouting. He didn't speak clearly. I knew these things because I overheard them. Because my parents mentioned therapy appointments in passing. Because my sister looked permanently tired in photos. But I wasn't part of his life. I wasn't the aunt, uncle who showed up with gifts. I wasn't the one who learned his routines or understood his sounds. I wasn't there for birthdays or hospital visits or tiny victories that meant everything to them. I erased myself. And in doing so, I erased him to. At night, guilt sometimes crept in, quietly. It asked questions I didn't want to answer. What if he asks about you? What if he knows you avoided him? What kind of person does that make you? I buried those thoughts under excuses. I wouldn't know what to do. I'd just make things awkward. They don't need me. That lie worked until the day it didn't. It was an ordinary afternoon when I stopped by my parents' house unannounced. I expected silence. Maybe the TV on low volume. Maybe my mother in the kitchen. Instead, I heard laughter. Not polite laughter, not forced happiness, real laughter, childlike, uneven, joyful laughter coming from the living room. I stopped walking, Then I saw him. My nephew, older than I expected, smaller than other kids his age, sitting on the floor with a toy, his hands moving clumsily. His face lit up like the sun had chosen him personally. He looked up. Our eyes met. And for the first time since the day he was born, he saw me. He didn't look confused. He didn't look afraid. He smiled, a wide, imperfect, beautiful smile. And in that moment, every excuse I had ever made shattered. The smile stayed with me long after that moment, like it had burned itself into my memory. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, frozen in the hallway, watching my nephew play on the floor like I was witnessing something forbidden. He banged the toy against the carpet, laughing at the sound it made, completely unaware that the person staring at him had spent years pretending he didn't exist. My mother noticed me first. She turned, surprised. "Oh, you're here." Her voice wasn't cold. That somehow hurt more. My nephew followed her gaze and looked back at me again. His smile widened, like he was pleased by the idea of a new face in the room. He made a soft sound, not quite a word, not quite a laugh, and reached out clumsily in my direction. That small gesture broke me. I felt something tighten in my chest. Something I'd kept locked away for years. Guilt rushed in, hot and unforgiving. This child didn't know I'd avoided him. He didn't know I'd chosen comfort over courage. All he knew was that someone new had walked into his world, and that was exciting. "Do you want to say hi?" My mother asked gently. I swallowed. My mouth was dry. Yeah, I can." I knelt awkwardly, unsure of where to put my hands, my eyes darting to my mother for guidance like a nervous beginner. My nephew watched me with intense curiosity, studying my face as if committing it to memory. "Hi," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. I'm your aunt, uncle." The word felt strange, heavy, earned too late. He made another sound and tapped his toy against my knee, laughing at the noise. The contact startled me. It was so small, so innocent, but it felt like a confession. My sister walked in then, carrying a cup of water. When she saw me kneeling in front of her son, she stopped short. For a second, no one spoke. I looked up at her, ready for anger, resentment, accusation, anything. Instead, her eyes filled with tears. Not dramatic ones, quiet ones, the kind that slide down your face when you've been strong for too long. "You're here," she said softly. "I'm sorry," I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other before I could stop them. "I should have been here. I should have." She set the cup down and crossed the room in 3 steps, pulling me into a hug so tight it knocked the breath out of me. "I missed you," she whispered. That broke what was left of my defenses. I cried then, right there, in front of my family, in front of the nephew I had ignored for years. I cried for the moments I'd missed, the birthdays, the milestones, the quiet nights my sister spent exhausted and alone, while I chose distance. Later, after my nephew had been put down for a nap, my sister and I sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet in that rare, fragile way it gets when caregivers finally have a moment to breathe. I didn't know how to handle it, I admitted, staring at my hands. When he was born, I was scared, and instead of dealing with that, I ran. She nodded slowly. "I know, that surprised me." "You do?" She smiled sadly. I could see it, but I didn't want to force you. "Everyone handles things differently." I pretended he didn't exist, I said, my voice cracking. "That feels unforgivable." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "He exists whether you're here or not. The question is whether you want to exist in his life now." I thought about that all night. In the days that followed, I started showing up. At first, I felt like an intruder. I didn't know his routines. I didn't know how to calm him when he got overwhelmed. I didn't know what sounds meant hunger, discomfort, or excitement. But I learned. Slowly. Awkwardly. I learned that he loved music, especially anything with a strong beat. I learned that he hated sudden loud noises. I learned the exact way he liked his blanket folded and how his laughter sounded different when he was truly happy. I also learned how hard it was. The therapy appointments, the endless paperwork, The stares from strangers in public places. The way people spoke slowly to him, or worse, spoke around him like he wasn't there. One afternoon, while we were at a park, a woman leaned toward my sister and whispered, "I'm so sorry." "For what?" My sister asked calmly. "For, my sister smiled tightly. "He's not dead." That moment stayed with me. I realized how often I'd treated my nephew like a tragedy instead of a person. How often I'd seen his disability before seeing him. And that realization hurt more than guilt. It brought shame. But my nephew didn't hold grudges. Every time I visited, he greeted me with the same crooked smile, the same eager curiosity. He didn't care that I'd been absent. He cared that I was there now. Weeks turned into months. I became a regular presence. I learned how to feed him, how to play with him, how to advocate for him when others underestimated him. I learned patience in ways I never had before. One evening, while I was helping him stack blocks, he looked up at me and said my name. Not perfectly, not clearly, but unmistakably. I froze. My sister gasped from across the room, covering her mouth. I laughed and cried at the same time, pulling him into a careful hug. That single word erased years of avoidance. Still, the guilt didn't disappear overnight. There were moments when I caught myself wondering how different things could have been if I'd been there from the start. One night, I asked my sister that question. "Do you ever resent me?" I asked quietly. She thought for a long time. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but not anymore." "Why?" "Because you're here now, and he knows you. That matters more than the past." I looked at my nephew, asleep on the couch, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I had wasted years pretending he didn't exist. Now, I couldn't imagine a life where he didn't. The first time someone hurt my nephew's feelings in front of me, I realized how much I had changed. We were at a small family gathering. Nothing big, just relatives, kids running around, food on folding tables. My nephew was sitting beside me, happily tapping a spoon against his cup, absorbed in the sound it made. He was content, peaceful. A distant cousin leaned toward another adult and whispered, not quietly enough, "What's wrong with him?" I felt it before I thought it, a sharp heat in my chest. My jaw tightened. My sister stiffened across the table, her eyes already preparing for the familiar ache of explanation or defense. She had carried that burden for years. Before she could say a word, I spoke. "There's nothing wrong with him," I said evenly. "He's just different." The cousin blinked, embarrassed, mumbled something, and walked away. My sister looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Later that night, as we cleaned up, she said quietly, "Thank you." That was when I understood something important. This wasn't just about showing up anymore. It was about standing up. Life didn't suddenly become easier. My nephew's challenges didn't disappear because I decided to be better. There were setbacks, hard days, moments when frustration crept in and tested my patience. But there were victories too. The day he took his first independent steps, shaky and determined. We all held our breath like the world might break if we moved. When he finally crossed the room and collapsed into my sister's arms, we cried like we'd just witnessed a miracle. Because we had, I started taking him out on my own sometimes. At first, people stared. I noticed it immediately, the sideways glances, the curious eyes, the uncomfortable smiles. I used to shrink under that kind of attention. Now, I met it head on. One afternoon at a grocery store, a child pointed at him and asked loudly, "Why does he walk funny?" Before the parent could hush them, my nephew left, completely unbothered, and kept walking. I knelt beside the child and said, "Everyone walks their own way. That's okay." The child nodded, satisfied. It amazed me how simple kindness could be, how complicated we adults make it. As years passed, my nephew grew in his own way. Slowly, steadily, he learned new words, new skills, new ways to express himself. Each achievement felt monumental, not because society said it should be, but because we knew how hard he worked for every inch forward. One evening, while I was tucking him into bed, He reached out and held my hand. Stay, he said. Just one word. But it held everything. I sat beside him until he fell asleep, listening to his breathing, thinking about all the nights I hadn't been there, thinking about how close I'd come to missing all of this, not because of circumstance, but because of choice. The truth I never liked admitting was this: I wasn't avoiding my nephew because of his disability. I was avoiding my own fear of responsibility, fear of discomfort, fear of loving someone I couldn't fix. But he didn't need fixing. He needed presence. One afternoon, years after that first unannounced visit, my sister and I sat on the porch while my nephew played nearby. Do you remember when he was born? She asked. I nodded. Too clearly, she smiled softly. I used to wonder if you'd ever come round. I almost didn't, I admitted. But you did. I watched my nephew laugh as he chased bubbles across the yard. His joy unfiltered, unstoppable. I didn't lose years because of him, I said quietly. I lost them because of myself. She leaned her head against my shoulder. We all lose time to fear. What matters is what we do. After that night, I scrolled back through old photos on my phone, the ones I'd avoided opening for years. Hospital pictures, therapy rooms, birthday candles. I saw them differently now. Not as reminders of what I'd run from, but as proof of resilience, of love that kept going even when I wasn't there. I thought about how easily I'd erased my nephew from my life and how easily I could have missed the person he became. The next morning, I picked him up early. We went for ice cream, even though it was too early and too cold and totally impractical. He laughed the whole time. As we sat on a bench, ice cream melting down his fingers. He leaned against me and said my name again, perfectly this time. In that moment, I understood something I wish I'd known years ago. Ignoring someone doesn't protect you from pain, it only protects you from love. And love, especially the kind that challenges you, is worth everything.